The final argument, the one that broke the dam, started over something so trivial I can barely remember it. A dish left in the sink, maybe. Or a bill I'd forgotten to pay. It doesn't matter. What mattered was the familiar trajectory, the way a tiny spark could ignite a forest fire in our home. We were standing in the kitchen, the one with the granite countertops I'd picked out, the one that was supposed to be the heart of our home. Instead, it had become a courtroom where I was always the one on trial. Tom's face was turning that blotchy, angry red I knew so well. It was the color of his frustration, his self-pity. "I just can't do this anymore, Sarah," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the stainless steel appliances. "I swear to God, I am this close to calling a lawyer and filing for divorce." There it was. The nuclear option. His favorite weapon, the one he unsheathed whenever he felt cornered, whenever his own inadequacies were reflected back at him. For the last 5 years of our marriage, the word divorce had been the ghost at our feast, the chilling threat he used to shut down any argument he was losing. In the beginning, it had worked. The word would shatter me. I would dissolve into tears, my body shaking, begging him to take it back, promising to do better, to be better, to shrink myself down so his ego would have more room to breathe. But you can only be threatened with the same apocalypse so many times before you start to grow numb. The terror fades, worn away by repetition, and what's left is a deep, bone-aching weariness. This time, I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just looked at him, at the man I had once loved so fiercely I thought my heart would burst, and I felt an unnerving calm. A quiet, empty space where all that desperate love used to be. "Okay," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. It cut through his rage like a scalpel. The single word disarmed him completely. He had been braced for the usual storm of tears and apologies. He was not prepared for the calm. His anger faltered, his face slackening with confusion. But I didn't give him time to recalibrate, to find a new line of attack. I simply turned my back on him, walked up the stairs to our daughter's room, and gently woke her. Emma was 4, all warm, sleepy breath and tangled hair. I whispered that we were going on a little adventure, and she just nodded, her trust in me absolute. I packed a small duffel bag for us, my movements efficient and calm, as if I were packing for a weekend trip to her grandparents' house, not fleeing my own life. Downstairs, Tom was still standing in the middle of the kitchen, looking lost and foolish. He watched me walk to the front door, Emma now a warm, solid weight in my arms. He didn't say a word. He just watched me go. The rain was coming down in sheets as I drove away, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. In the rearview mirror, I saw the warm, welcoming lights of my beautiful home, our home, recede into the stormy darkness until they were just another pinprick in the night. Emma was already fast asleep in her car seat, her small face peaceful, utterly oblivious to the fact that her world had just been fractured. I reached back and stroked her soft hair, a silent, fierce promise forming in my heart. I looked at her sweet reflection, then at my own in the mirror, my face pale and tear-streaked in the intermittent glow of the streetlights. "This is the last time," I whispered, my voice a raw thread in the roaring silence of the car. "Mummy promises, sweet girl. This is the very last time." You're probably wondering how I got there, how a marriage that started with so much promise ended with me and my child fleeing into a storm like refugees. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow poisoning, a death by 1,000 cuts, 1,000 compromises, 1,000 moments of me putting myself last. When Tom and I first got together, he was my biggest cheerleader. I was ambitious, driven, climbing the corporate ladder in finance, and he seemed to love that about me. He was charming and full of life, and he made me feel seen. A few years in, just after Emma was born, I was offered the kind of promotion people spend their entire careers chasing. The only catch? It was a 2-year assignment heading up the London office. It was a dream come true, a validation of all my hard work. But when I told Tom, his face fell. He painted a picture of a lonely life for him and Emma, of me missing her first steps, her first words. He talked about his own dream of being a stay-at-home dad, of creating a perfect, stable home for our daughter. My salary, especially with the promotion, was more than enough to support us in luxury. So, I made a choice. I chose my family. I turned down London and negotiated a remote-heavy senior role that kept me in the States. I told myself it was a sacrifice made for love. But looking back, it was the first brick I laid in the foundation of my own gilded cage. Tom embraced the stay-at-home dad role with enthusiasm at first, but soon, the ambition I'd fallen in love with curdled into a quiet, simmering resentment. He started making passive-aggressive comments about my long hours, my business trips, my obsession with my career, the very career that funded his comfortable, work-free life. At a dinner party with friends, when someone asked me about a complex deal I'd just closed, Tom laughed and said, "Yeah, Sarah loves her spreadsheets more than she loves people." The table went quiet. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck, but I just smiled and changed the subject. Then there was my sister, Jessica. She's 2 years younger than me, and has spent her entire life cultivating the narrative that she was the beautiful, free-spirited one, while I was the boring, responsible one. Our parents bought into it completely. Jessica could do no wrong. Her string of failed jobs and bad relationships were just her finding herself. My successes, on the other hand, were always met with a strange kind of suspicion, as if I'd achieved them by being cold and unfeminine. They adored Jessica, making endless excuses for her poor choices while holding me to an impossibly high standard. I remember my 30th birthday party vividly. I'd worked hard, saved up, and bought myself a beautiful, expensive silk dress. For once, I didn't feel like the boring, responsible one. I felt glamorous. Midway through the party, Jessica, already a few glasses of wine in, stumbled and accidentally spilled her entire glass of red wine down the front of my dress. A perfect, dark red stain bloomed across the pale silk. She let out a theatrical gasp, followed by a tinkling laugh. "Oops. Clumsy me." "Oh, don't worry, Sarah, it's just a dress. You can afford another one with that big salary of yours." My mother rushed over, not to help me, but to fuss over Jessica. "Oh, honey, are you all right? Don't worry about the dress, Sarah, your sister didn't mean it." I saw my best friend Chloe watching from across the room, her eyes narrowed with an anger I wasn't allowing myself to feel. Later, she pulled me aside in the kitchen. "You need to be careful with her," she'd warned, her voice low. "That was no accident. She's not your friend." I'd brushed it off, like I always did. She was my sister. Family is supposed to forgive. The biggest red flag, the one that in retrospect was a giant, screaming, flashing billboard, happened about 3 years ago. I'd just received a massive annual bonus after landing a major client for my firm. I was ecstatic. This wasn't just money, it was security. It was a guarantee that my daughter, Emma, would have every opportunity in life. It was her college fund, her safety net, her future. I spent a week with a top financial advisor, a woman who specialized in asset protection. We structured an ironclad, irrevocable trust fund in Emma's name. It was my masterpiece, my way of ensuring that no matter what happened in the world or in my life, my daughter would be protected. The house, my stock portfolio, the bulk of my savings, I put it all into that trust. The lawyer was very clear, as the sole founder and trustee, my name, and my name alone, held any power. I came home that Friday, buzzing with excitement and pride, holding a thick, intimidating folder of documents. "Honey, you have to see this. I've just secured our entire future," I said, spreading the papers across the polished wood of our coffee table. Tom was on the couch, his feet up, completely engrossed in a football game. He glanced over, his eyes glazed with indifference. "That's great, babe," he said, his attention already snapping back to the screen. "You just need to sign here," I said, tapping the signature line on the final page. "It's just a formality, some legal stuff to make it all official." He waved a dismissive hand, not even turning his head. "Oh, whatever. You're the brains of this operation, Sarah. You handle the boring money stuff. I trust you." He grabbed a pen from the side table, scribbled his name in the blank space without even reading the page title, spousal consent to transfer of assets, and immediately turned back to the TV. Did you see that pass? Unbelievable. I should have been insulted. I should have been furious that he cared more about a football game than the legal and financial framework of our family's entire future. Instead, a part of me, a tired, weary part, was just relieved. It was easier this way. No arguments, no need to explain. I quietly gathered the papers, a signed testament to his willful, arrogant ignorance, and filed them away in my home office safe. I told myself I was protecting our family. I didn't realize I was also forging my own escape hatch. The final storm, the one that would finally sink the ship of our marriage, began with a phone call. It was Jessica, sobbing hysterically. Her latest boyfriend had kicked her out, she had nowhere to go, she was broke. Can I just stay with you for a little while, Sarah? Please? Just until I get back on my feet? My gut, my long-suppressed instincts, screamed a resounding no. But before I could form a gentle refusal, Tom, who had overheard the call, took the phone from my hand. Of course, she can stay with us, he said, his voice oozing a concern he rarely showed for me. Don't worry, Jess. Your family. We'll take care of you. The moment Jessica moved into our guest room, the atmosphere in our house shifted. It became heavy, charged with a strange, suffocating tension. She treated our home like a five-star hotel and me like the invisible housekeeping staff. She and Tom developed a whole private world of inside jokes, whispering and laughing in corners while I stood in the same room. I'd walk in on them watching a movie on the couch, huddled together under a blanket in a way that felt far too intimate. She started walking around in his old t-shirts and sweatpants, making him special breakfasts of the things I knew he loved, touching his arm or his back a little too often, a little too long. When I finally gathered the courage to bring it up with Tom, he exploded. He accused me of being paranoid, jealous, and insecure. She's your sister, for God's sake. She's hurting. Can't you have an ounce of compassion? He made me feel like I was the crazy one. I started to feel like a ghost in my own home, a stranger at my own dinner table, an intruder in my own marriage. The breaking point, the moment of impact that shattered all illusions, came on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd finished a big project ahead of schedule and decided to go home early to surprise Emma. I walked in the front door, calling out, "I'm home." The house was eerily silent. I figured Emma must be napping and Tom was reading or watching TV. I tiptoed upstairs, a smile on my face, already imagining the look of delight on my daughter's face. But as I reached the landing at the top of the stairs, I heard a sound from our bedroom. A soft giggle. A distinctly female giggle. It was Jessica's. My blood ran cold. Every nerve ending in my body went on high alert. I pushed the bedroom door open. It wasn't locked. They hadn't even bothered to show me the basic courtesy of locking the door. And there they were. My husband and my sister. In my bed. The bed I shared with him, the one we had picked out together at Pottery Barn. They were tangled in the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets I had bought, the ones I had just washed and put on the bed that weekend. For a long, silent second, the world stopped turning. All I could hear was the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart, a wild bird trapped in my chest. They scrambled apart, their faces a comical mask of shock. But beneath the shock, horrifyingly, there was no real shame. No gut-wrenching panic. Before I could even form a word, before the scream that was building in my chest like a pressure cooker could escape, Jessica did something I will never forget. She pulled the sheet up to her chin, not in modesty, but like a shield. She looked me up and down, a slow, triumphant, malicious smirk playing on her lips. "See," she said, her voice dripping with 5 years of pent-up jealousy and venom. "I told you he'd get tired of playing house with a CEO." It wasn't just the sight of them together that broke me in that moment. It was her words. It was the calculated cruelty, the way she took my success, my hard work, the very thing that provided for all of them, and twisted it into a weapon to stab me with. It was a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs and all the fight from my body. Something inside me snapped. But it wasn't a loud, messy explosion. It was a quiet, cold, clean break. The part of me that had loved them, that had made excuses for them, that had always forgiven them, simply ceased to exist. In its place was a terrifying, crystal clear calm. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things. I slowly raised my phone, my hand as steady as a surgeon's, and took a single, clear picture of their shocked, guilty faces, of the rumpled sheets, of my sister in my marital bed. The camera flash was blindingly bright in the dim afternoon light, a stark, unforgiving moment of truth. Then, I lowered the phone, turned around, and walked out of the room. I went to Emma's room, where she was playing quietly with her dolls, lost in her own innocent world. I picked her up, her small, warm body a solid, living anchor in my spinning universe. "Let's go for a ride, sweetie," I said, my voice perfectly even. I walked past my bedroom door without a second glance, down the stairs, and out of the front door. I didn't look back. The thick, stunned silence I left behind was more damning, more final, than any accusation I could have ever screamed. The first few days were a blur of logistics and suppressed grief. I was on autopilot, functioning at the most basic level. I was staying at Chloe's, moving through her bright, cheerful house like a ghost while she handled everything with fierce, protective efficiency. She fielded calls from my frantic parents, she made sure Emma and I were fed, and she let me just sit in silence for hours. The first lawyer I called was a man my father had recommended, a small-town family lawyer with a kind but weary face and an office that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I sat on a cracked leather chair, my hands clenched in my lap, and told him the whole sordid story, my voice a flat monotone. He sighed, steepling his fingers and looking at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Well, this is a messy one, Mrs. Thompson," he said. "In this state, with the house in both your names, you'll likely have to sell it and split the proceeds 50-50ths. My advice? Try to settle this amicably. A long, drawn-out divorce will only hurt the child." I walked out of his office feeling smaller, more powerless, and more hopeless than ever. Amicably? They had set my life on fire and he was telling me to be nice about it so I wouldn't get burned any worse. I went back to Chloe's and collapsed on her couch, and for the first time since I'd walked out of my house, I let the sobs come. They were ragged, ugly, wrenching sobs that seemed to be torn from the deepest part of my soul. Chloe let me cry for exactly 10 minutes. Then she put a cup of hot, strong tea in my hands and sat down on the coffee table opposite me, her expression fierce. "Okay, that's enough of that," she said, her voice firm but kind. "You are not a victim, Sarah. You are a warrior who has forgotten how to fight. But you don't bring a goldfish to a shark fight. That man was a goldfish." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with an anger on my behalf that I couldn't yet feel for myself. "You need a shark. You need a great white." She slid a business card across the coffee table. It was simple, elegant, printed on thick, cream-colored stock with a single name embossed in sharp, black letters, Evelyn Reed, ESQ. The next day, I was sitting in a sleek, minimalist office on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper, with a panoramic view of the city I had worked so hard to conquer. Evelyn Reed was exactly as Chloe had described her. She was in her late 50s, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of absolute, unshakable confidence. She didn't offer me tissues or platitudes or sympathy. She just listened, her gaze never leaving my face as I recounted the entire story, from the missed London promotion to the final, devastating betrayal in my own bed. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, tapping a pen against a leather-bound notepad. Then she asked a single, penetrating question. "What do you want, Sarah?" I hesitated, my mind a jumble of pain and anger. "I want custody of my daughter. I want him to pay for what he did." No, she cut me off, her voice sharp but not unkind. The law will determine custody and financial settlements. I know what you're entitled to. I'm asking you a different question. When you walk away from this, what do you, Sarah, want? I thought of Jessica's sneering, triumphant face. I thought of Tom's casual, manipulative cruelty. I thought of the years of being made to feel small, of apologizing for my own strength. I want them to understand what they've lost, I said, my voice low and hard, a core of steel forming around my heart. I want them to know that they didn't break me. They freed me. And I want them to have nothing. I want them to walk away with nothing but each other. Evelyn nodded slowly, a flicker of something that looked like respect in her eyes. Good. That, I can work with. What assets are we dealing with? That was my cue. This was the moment. I reached into my oversized leather tote bag and pulled out the thick, heavy folder I had brought with me. The one Tom had signed with a dismissive scrawl while watching a football game. I placed it on her polished mahogany desk with a solid, satisfying thud. Everything is in here, I said, my voice gaining strength. The house, the investment portfolio, the retirement accounts. It's all in a trust one established for my daughter 3 years ago. I paused, taking a deep, steadying breath. I am the sole trustee. His name is on the original mortgage application, but not on the deed of trust that legally supersedes it. Evelyn opened the folder. She scanned the first few pages, her expression unreadable. Then she got to the signature pages. She looked at Tom's careless, looping signature, then back at the meticulously organized asset lists. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. It was the first time I'd seen her smile, and it was terrifying. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted its wounded, oblivious prey. Oh, this is good, she murmured, more to herself than to me. This is very, very good. She looked up at me, and her eyes were gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Sarah, your husband didn't just cheat on you. He handed you a loaded gun, a signed confession, and the keys to the entire kingdom. She closed the folder with a decisive, final snap. All right, she said, her tone shifting, all business now. Here's what we're going to do. The family meeting was my parents' idea, of course. They called me a week later, their voices a cloying mixture of false concern and thinly veiled disapproval. They wanted to talk things through, to mediate, to do what's best for Emma. It was a trap, and I knew it. It was a carefully orchestrated ambush designed to shame me into submission. Tom and Jessica would be there, playing the part of the remorseful, star-crossed lovers. My parents would play the role of the concerned, impartial elders, pressuring me to be the bigger person, to let Tom and Jessica have the house, to not make a messy scene, to think of the family's reputation. Of course, I said into the phone, my voice as sweet and smooth as honey. I think a family meeting is a wonderful idea. I'm so glad you suggested it. Let's do it at your place. Sunday at noon sounds perfect. I spent the next few days preparing for war. Evelyn and I were on the phone constantly. She drew up the divorce papers with surgical precision, petitioning for sole physical and legal custody based on moral turpitude. She drafted the formal, legally binding eviction notice. Every I was dotted, every T was crossed. It was a masterpiece of legal devastation. I walked into my parents' house that Sunday feeling strangely calm, like the eye of a hurricane. The air in their pristine living room was thick with judgment. My mother fussed with the curtains, refusing to meet my eye. My father looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment, as if I were the one who had failed. And there they were, sitting on the familiar floral sofa as if they owned it, Tom and Jessica, holding hands. They looked smug, confident, like a king and queen holding court in their newly conquered territory. They thought this was their coronation. They had no idea it was their execution. My mother started, wringing her hands. Sarah, we're all so very worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. This anger, It's not healthy. You can't just take a child from her father. My father chimed in, his voice deep with paternal authority. Your sister and Tom, they've made a terrible mistake. We're not condoning it. But they love each other. A good woman, a strong woman, accepts that and moves on gracefully. Jessica spoke next, her voice a masterclass in fake sympathy. She even managed to squeeze out a tear. We don't want to be cruel, Sarah. We know this is hard. But Tom and I need to start our life together. In our home. It's the only home Emma has ever known. It's only fair that you find your own place. For Emma's sake, of course. Tom nodded solemnly, placing a protective arm around her shoulder. She's right. The house is the only stable thing Emma has right now. We can't uproot her. We can be generous in the divorce settlement, of course. I let them talk. I let them spin their web of self-serving lies and twisted logic. I let them lay out their entire, pathetic case. I watched the self-satisfaction bloom on their faces, the certainty that they had me cornered. When they were finally done, a heavy, expectant silence fell over the room. They all looked at me, waiting for me to break, to cry, to argue, to accept my fate. Instead, I smiled. A small, private smile. Just then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. Oh, that must be for me, I said brightly, getting up from my armchair. I opened the door, and there she was. Evelyn Reed, dressed in a razor-sharp navy blue power suit, her expression like granite. Behind her stood a tall, imposing man in a plain uniform, a professional process server, his face impassive. I led them into the living room. The smug looks on my family's faces vanished instantly, replaced by confusion, which quickly morphed into alarm. Evelyn didn't waste a single second on pleasantries. She walked to the center of the room, her presence sucking all the air out of it. She placed her expensive leather briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a sharp, authoritative click. Good afternoon, she said, her voice cool and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am representing Sarah Thompson in her divorce proceedings. She turned her sharp gaze on Tom, who suddenly looked like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. Mr. Thompson, I believe this is for you. The process server stepped forward and handed Tom a thick stack of papers. You've been served. Tom stared at the papers in his hand as if they were a venomous snake. What is this? He stammered. That, Evelyn said, her voice devoid of any emotion, is a petition for divorce. It is also a motion for sole physical and legal custody of your daughter, Emma, based on a clear pattern of moral turpitude and the creation of an unstable home environment. It is also a temporary restraining order, prohibiting you from coming within 500 feet of my client or her place of work. But that's not what we're here to discuss today. She reached back into her briefcase and pulled out another document. It was a pristine, bound copy of the trust agreement. She placed it on the table in front of Tom with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. You might recognize your signature on this document, dated August 14th, 3 years ago. It's the binding legal agreement for the Emma Grace Trust. She let that sink in, her eyes scanning the shocked faces in the room. According to this document, which you signed of your own free will, 100% of the major marital assets, including the property at 123 Maple Lane, are the sole and exclusive property of the trust. A trust for which, she paused for a beat, letting the tension build to an unbearable level, Ms. Sarah Thompson is the one and only trustee. You could have heard a pin drop. The color drained from Tom's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. Jessica's jaw went slack, her mouth hanging open in a perfect, silent O of disbelief. Evelyn continued, her voice as relentless and unforgiving as a glacier. What this means, in layman's terms, so that everyone is perfectly clear, is that for the past 3 years, you have been living in Sarah's house. Not your house. Her house. She turned her head slowly, fixing her cold, reptilian gaze directly on my sister. And you, Ms. Evans, are an unauthorized occupant. A squatter, to be precise. That's a lie. That's impossible. Jessica finally shrieked, finding her voice. The house is half his. He told me. Did he? Evelyn said, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow in amusement. A deed of trust, as any first-year law student could tell you, supersedes any mortgage agreement in a court of law. His name on a bank loan is irrelevant. Her name is on the title. Period. She turned back to the impassive process server. He stepped forward again, this time placing a single, crisp, white envelope on top of the thick stack of divorce papers in Tom's lap. And that, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a cool, final, devastating tone, is a formal, legally binding eviction notice. You both have 30 days to vacate the premises. If you are not gone by the morning of the 31st day, the sheriff will be there to physically remove you and your belongings. The aftermath was pure, unadulterated chaos. It was glorious. Jessica started screaming, a wild, hysterical sound, calling me every name under the sun. Tom just sat there, catatonic, his face white with shock, staring at the papers that had just systematically dismantled his entire life. My parents were sputtering, looking from me to Evelyn to the papers, their carefully constructed world of denial and favoritism crumbling into dust around them. My father kept muttering, I don't understand, I just don't understand. My mother just wept silently into her hands. I stood up. I had seen enough. The show was over. I looked at my parents, at their shocked, betrayed faces. I was a good daughter. I was a good sister, I said, my voice clear and steady over the din. I did everything you ever asked of me. But you were never good parents to me. You chose sides a long time ago. Now you can live with your choice. Then I looked at Tom and Jessica, who had now started yelling at each other, a tornado of blame and recrimination. Good luck with your new life, I said. I didn't have to fake the smile that touched my lips. I turned and walked toward the door, Evelyn following calmly behind me. The sound of their shouting, of their sordid little empire imploding, was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It wasn't the sound of revenge. It was the sound of my chains breaking. A week later, Chloe forwarded me a video a mutual friend had posted on social media. It was Tom and Jessica, in the middle of a screaming match on the front lawn of my house, while loading shabby cardboard boxes into a beat-up U-Haul truck. How could you be so stupid? Jessica was shrieking, her face contorted with a rage that made her look ugly. How could you not read what you were signing? You just gave her everything. Me? Tom yelled back, throwing a box marked kitchen onto the truck with so much force it splintered open, spilling cheap mugs onto the asphalt. You were the one who was so sure she was weak. You were the one who said she'd just roll over and give us everything. I guess your great, undying love for me didn't include a financial backup plan, did it? Their great romance, the epic love story they had destroyed my family for, couldn't survive its first encounter with reality. It couldn't survive a cramped, one-bedroom apartment across town and a shared bank account that was suddenly, shockingly empty. Watching them tear each other apart, I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt a profound sense of pity, and an even more profound sense of relief. They hadn't won anything. They had only lost. And I had finally won myself back. 6 months later, my life is unrecognizable, in the best possible way. The first thing I did after they were gone was hire a cleaning crew to deep clean the entire house, and then I had a friend come over and we burned sage in every single room, chasing out the ghosts of their betrayal. The house, once a place of tension and quiet misery, is now filled with light and laughter. Emma and I painted her room a bright, sunny yellow, and we have impromptu dance parties in the living room almost every night. It's a home again. Our home. The company I work for, hearing about my new situation, reopened the London position. My boss called me personally. The job is still yours if you want it, Sarah, he said. We think you'd be brilliant. This time, there was no one to hold me back. This time, I said yes. Emma and I are moving in the fall. It feels less like running away and more like running towards something new, something that is entirely and unapologetically mine. The divorce was finalized last month. As expected, I have sole physical and legal custody. Tom sees Emma on supervised visits every other weekend, but his heart doesn't seem to be in it. Without the house, the car, and the comfortable lifestyle I provided, his interest in playing the role of doting father has waned significantly. Jessica is no longer in the picture. The last I heard, she had moved to another state to live with an aunt, their epic love story having fizzled out in a flurry of unpaid bills and bitter recriminations. A few months ago, on a quiet evening after Emma was asleep, I did something I never thought I would do. I opened my laptop, and I started a blog. I started it anonymously, calling it simply, The Trustee. I shared my story, not the gory, personal details, but the lessons I learned the hard way. I wrote about financial literacy for women, about the importance of understanding every document you sign, about setting up trusts to protect yourself and your children, about recognizing the subtle red flags of financial abuse and manipulation. I never expected much, but it took off. It turned out there were thousands of women out there with similar stories, women who had been underestimated, who had been taught to be nice instead of smart. They started sharing their own stories in the comments, creating a community of support and shared wisdom. Last night, I read a comment that made me cry, but this time, they were tears of gratitude and connection. A woman wrote, "I've been married for 20 years and my husband has always handled all the finances, telling me not to worry my pretty little head about it. After reading your story, I asked to see our investment statements. He refused. I hired a lawyer. It turns out he's been hiding assets in an offshore account for years, preparing to leave me with nothing. You saved me from financial ruin. You saved my future. Thank you." I realized then that my story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking the ugliest, most painful thing that ever happened to me and turning it into a beacon for someone else lost in the dark. This morning, Emma and I were in the backyard. The garden had been neglected for years, but we were slowly bringing it back to life, pulling weeds and planting new flowers. She came running up to me, her small, muddy hands cupped together, holding a single, tiny, perfect seed. "Mummy," she said, her eyes wide with 4-year-old excitement. "Can we plant a new tree? A brand new one, just for us?" I knelt in the soft, dark earth beside her. "Of course, we can, sweet girl." Together, we dug a small hole, placed the seed inside, and covered it with soil. As we watered it, I looked at my daughter, at the brilliant sunlight in her hair, at the clean, open slate of our future stretching out before us. The betrayal didn't destroy me. It didn't define me. It simply cleared the scorched ground, making way for something new, something stronger, something more beautiful, to grow in its place. And this time, I would be the one tending the garden. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I know so many of you have faced your own battles. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who is just starting to realize they're in a similar situation?
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.